Welcome back to this week's episode of The Five Insider. There's no Joel this week, so I'm filling in. But as usual, we are joined by the brilliant David Ornstein. David, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Joe. It's a pleasure to be on with you. I was going to say an upgrade, but I see you both as being legends in your own right. So you and Joel, it's all good fun.
Yeah, love that, love that. We got to start at Old Trafford last night, haven't we? A crushing Manchester United performance, really, against Tottenham Hotspur. It felt like a real vindication of the board's decision to go with Erik ten Hag, and probably his best performance of the Premier League era under his management, would you say?
Yeah, I was there at the game at Old Trafford and I was hugely impressed. It was interesting that I was also at the Liverpool and Arsenal home games that United did so well in. And the atmosphere was crackling as you came to the stadium and into the ground and when the match started. And even though against Arsenal there was some sort of early adversity with a goal disallowed, Arsenal were on top. Liverpool, it was a dominant display by Man United throughout, but it felt like the occasion on both of those matches was just massive. And I sensed that United were going to win it. I didn't have that same feeling coming to the ground. The atmosphere was a little bit lower. And the way Tottenham have been grinding out results, their position in the league table, their manager, how clinical Son and Kane have been, and where they are on their journey. I just wondered if this is the one that United get caught out on. And I couldn't have been more wrong. United laid siege to the Tottenham goal. Their dominance was like I've not seen in many Premier League matches this season. As someone sat next to me said, what about City against United in the derby a few weeks previously? But that aside, this was an absolute peppering of the Tottenham goal. United were creating chances left, right and centre. The only concern from their point of view was that they weren't finishing them. And you wondered if they could be stung on the counter-attack by Spurs. And you've seen that sort of thing before. But United got their goals. They came away from it with a feeling that it wasn't just one of the best performances, probably the best of this season for Man United under Ten Hag, but maybe in a number of years, which have been a roller coaster. And there have not been many highlights by United standards along the way. But this really was a top-level victory against a really good side who expect to be challenging in the Premier League and Champions League and for domestic honours under a manager who's a winner. And you feel that they've turned a corner, Tottenham, somewhat under Conte. But this was one-way traffic. And I think the decision to appoint Ten Hag has already been vindicated. I know it's still early days, but those sort of landmark victories against Liverpool, Arsenal, and now Tottenham, but also away from home. I think they've won every match apart from the Manchester derby since the defeat at Brentford, was it, early in the season. And that says that even on the road, they've got character and quality and resilience. Ten Hag is really stamping his mark on this team in terms of selection, which we'll come on to talk about, no doubt. There's some style, there's some identity, there's a very clear plan. And I know, and I've said before on this show and many others, that there are going to be bumps along the way. They're going to have setbacks, disappointing results. Obviously, Newcastle just a few days earlier wasn't the best by United's expectations. But I do feel that there is something brewing under Ten Hag. I sense it among the fan base. You can see it among the players. And early days, but really encouraging signs for Manchester United.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there about selection. Obviously, some big news before the game was that Cristiano Ronaldo wasn't selected in the starting 11. And then that news got even bigger, didn't it, around the 88th minute when he decided to not only leave the pitch off the substitutes bench, but according to Laurie this morning, even leave the stadium before the end of the game, which is obviously going to cause ripples amongst Manchester United fans, given there was a similar incident, wasn't there, against Rayo Vallecano, where he left the stadium and was reprimanded by Erik ten Hag.
Well, you say ripples, Joe, among the Man United fans, but according to Laurie Whitwell's report in The Athletic, he says there were no ripples in the Manchester United dressing room where the mood was celebratory, despite the fact that Cristiano Ronaldo had walked down the tunnel without permission before the end of the match and according to Laurie's report, left the stadium as well early, which is one thing doing it against Rayo Vallecano in a pre-season friendly, which shouldn't happen in its own right, but it's quite another thing in a Premier League match a competitive match, but also a really important one that went so well for Manchester United. And really, that was the only sort of blemish from a wider perspective. I don't think Erik ten Hag will be losing much sleep about it, because he's got a team that's posted a crucial victory. He's got some players who are really hitting some form. But it is a problem, of course, for Manchester United. You know, it was clear over the summer that Cristiano Ronaldo wanted to move. I and many others reported it in great detail, that he felt his time there was over. He wanted to continue his career in the Champions League. United are in the Europa League this season. And there was interest from certain clubs. There were options explored by his representatives. Manchester United's public stance was always that he's not for sale, and Erik ten Hag and the club are counting on him for the season ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it there about the possibility of it coming towards the end of his Manchester United time, Cristiano Ronaldo. Is it actually a realistic possibility he could leave in January after the World Cup for destinations new?
Well, realistic, we'll know nearer the time, because the suitable offers were not there, it seemed, last summer. So will they be there in January? Maybe George Mendes, his representative, is working harder than in the summer to find a deal. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Even if he does, will the opportunities arise? Will Manchester United's stance change? The feeling when you see him as an unused substitute in some of these games and walking down the tunnel early and leaving the stadium early makes you feel that it would be sensible for all parties to find a solution in January, because in the summer he wanted to go. There has not been great reason for him to change that view. Maybe he will only be strengthened and hardened in that perspective. So what benefit is it to he or Manchester United staying for longer? If the answer is that he's going to be played more, there may be injuries, we know his quality remains, maybe not at his peak level, but he still, last season, was United's leading goal scorer. He may have a really good World Cup, then perhaps they'll go on. But the way things are looking, I would suggest that there's going to be some very important conversations to be had about a potential move in January. But you've got to consider that United need the bodies, and he's not just anybody. He's one of the best players in the world. And so they would presumably have to replace him if he's going to go, or they may decide that they will readdress the situation in the summer, whether or not he leaves in January. There's maybe some slight comparisons to a Mesut Ozil, for example, who at Arsenal was their sort of leading player, their biggest name on a big contract. And Mikel Arteta decided he was not right for him, whether it was in style or character, and he really ostracized him from the group. Cristiano Ronaldo has not been ostracized from the group in the same way, but you know, Arsenal decided to find a solution in the January that Ozil left, and we'll see if Manchester United do the same.
Yeah, you mentioned the Arsenal situation with Mesut Ozil there. It kind of strikes a chord with me as well with the Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang situation at Arsenal, of course, where he was kind of showing the exit door, and it left Arsenal a little bit short across the second half of the season. They opted not to bring anybody in to replace him. Do you think if he was to leave, let's say theoretically he did, Manchester United would be able to move in that January window? Would they have the funds? We saw John Murter at the recent Fans Forum saying that, you know, there was a lot of outlay in the summer and they might not be able to spend as much in subsequent windows.
Yeah, the example of Aubameyang is a great one, Joe, that somehow slipped my mind, but that's more recent and it's comparable. You know, the leading striker for that team, again, for differing reasons, was shifted by Mikel Arteta. He wasn't training with the first team. Again, Cristiano Ronaldo is. But it shows that some managers decide for what they believe to be the greater good of the squad to make some potentially very unpopular decisions for what they hope will benefit the club, the team, the results, the performances on the long run. It seems to have worked for Arsenal, and it's not worked out too badly for Aubameyang either. I don't think many people anticipated two moves in the subsequent 6 months, Barcelona and then Chelsea. And it's situations like that that may give hope to Ronaldo and his representatives and even United that an amicable parting may be found and he can continue to enjoy his years playing at the top level, because he's getting towards the end of what you would assume his career to be, even though he's sort of superhuman and you'd never write him off. But at his age, this is the final chapter, it's fair to say. In terms of what United might be able to do afterwards, they always plan their recruitment around the summer windows and they budget accordingly. And they're very clear that they will only move in January if opportunities arise that maybe are fast-tracked, that were meant for the following summer, but they can do it in January. Or with most clubs, an emergency situation, the loss of a player to injury or an unexpected transfer, or they're struggling towards the bottom of the league and they want to escape relegation. They are pushing towards the top of the league. They have to get into the Champions League or battle for the title, and it gives them that extra impetus. This is quite a unique situation in that, I mean, United aren't at the moment benefiting much from Ronaldo. So would they, if they sanctioned his departure, have to find a replacement? I'm sure it would be a strong consideration. One, because there is a significant attacking option, even if they're not using it much, taken away from them. And also the finances. His departure would free up a great amount of space and resource on the United wage bill. He's their highest paid player, and as far as we know, the highest paid player in the Premier League. So even if there's not a transfer fee, the monetary saving for United would probably allow them to raise money for a transfer fee and somebody else's salary. And, you know, we saw them linked with a number of players, or pursue a number of players for the attacking positions in the summer. Cody Gakpo was one, and he's spoken in recent days about his conversations with Erik ten Hag. They ended up spending more money to just bring in Anthony. Don't forget that they've got options in terms of Anthony Martial when he's fit. Of course, Marcus Rashford's leading the line at the moment. They'd like to think that Jadon Sancho will become more and more prominent. Remember, they also let Daniel James go previously, so that was one down. They've got Anthony Elanga in there. They've been linked with attackers, strikers in particular. You know, Erling Haaland was a player they were heavily linked with before he joined Manchester City, although I don't think that was ever a serious consideration for him. At various points, Tammy Abraham, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Benjamin Sesko, who was definitely one that they were in the mix for last summer, and he's moving to RB Leipzig. One, I guess, to keep an eye on for us, and I'm not suggesting there's anything brewing here by any means, but it is Harry Kane, of course. United have long been reported admirers of him and credited with an interest. Harry Kane is under contract at Tottenham until 2024, and there hasn't really been much suggestion of a new contract coming. Tentative reports here and there that, you know, Tottenham would be keen to tie him down. Well, of course they would from their perspective. But, you know, after that proposed move to Manchester City that never materialised, and the rumours of Bayern Munich, would United make a play at that? So next summer he'll have a year to go on his contract. And you've been told at various times as a reporter when you've looked into these situations that if Tottenham are challenging for trophies, winning trophies, pushing, you know, at the top of the league and for the latter stages of the Champions League, and are a really competitive force, then that would be to Kane's liking. You know, he wants to succeed with Tottenham, and in that sort of scenario, and if the numbers were right, then maybe a new contract would come about. If they're not, and you get to the point of Tottenham are still at the sort of level that they've been in recent years, then maybe he would wait to leave as a free agent in 2024, or maybe Daniel Levy would be a bit more open to sanctioning a departure with a year to go that brings him some return if he's not going to sign a new contract and stands to leave for free 12 months later than he was before. So I guess that's just one to watch. Kane's, you know, goal scoring prowess is clear for all to see. His fitness record seems to have improved as well. let's see how he does in the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Harry Kane there. I mean, that move would annoy one man in particular. I'd imagine Antonio Conte, if it were to miraculously happen. Obviously, lots of chat this week about his contract. Wasn't happy last night with his side's performance or the display of a lot of individual players. Where are we at with that sort of Antonio Conte contract situation? Because it feels like it's looming in the background like a black shadow at the moment.
Yeah, Antonio Conte is out of contract at Tottenham in 2023, but they do have an option to extend him by a year. So I think they'll be fairly relaxed in that sense. You'll have seen reports recently that they are looking to open contract talks with him next month. So ideally, you'd say during the World Cup. I'm sure there will be conversations because that provides an opportunity for so many clubs and managers to sit down and talk, players and clubs, about contracts too. Maybe even some managerial changes as well. But I don't know how far that will get the situation moving because Antonio Conte tends to wait on these things to know how a season's going to pan out, how it looks. And when you speak to people with knowledge of his career and this situation, they do suggest that he'll leave it until much later before making a final decision, even if there are conversations soon. And if that's to be end of the season summer, then that's really quite difficult for Tottenham because they need to plan ahead. And if they don't know if Antonio Conte is going to be staying, then it's not ideal from a Tottenham perspective. Of course, they can activate that year. But I think with somebody of Antonio Conte's pedigree, you would only do that if there's mutual buy-in, if he wants to stay. If he believes in the project, if you're going to provide him with the players that he feels are necessary, if he's going to take this team to a new level. And there'll always be clubs linked with him. We've seen Juventus once again and many others constantly rumoured to be destinations for him if he's to leave Tottenham. But it is coming to that crucial point. And Daniel Levy would definitely want some clarity as soon as possible. And I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So, yeah, it's a really tricky one. You feel at times with Spurs that it's moving in the right direction. You see some positive results and decent performances, and it reminds you that Antonio Conte can really extract the best out of teams and players. But then they go to Old Trafford, and that was a really disappointing performance. And I was struck by some of his comments after the game when he spoke about, you don't go from ninth position to title contenders in such a short space. He said he didn't see the sporting war inside his players at Old Trafford, the readiness to go toe-to-toe with them and battle. Now, these things can change very quickly. They win their next match and they're back on song, although it's a difficult one. I think they're playing Newcastle, who are having a really good season. So it's one to, of course, watch because we know around Antonio Conte, it's always very delicate. He wants the players provided to him that can really help his team's challenge. They invested heavily in the summer, brought in 6 players, but were they all his first choice targets? I don't know. I think their investment was good, but with him, it's a continual sort of regeneration process. A process of trying to sort of climb up to his level of expectations. He tends to be a more, short-term manager in terms of the winning comes quite quickly. And that's why there was so much scrutiny around his decision to take on the Tottenham job, which he initially rejected before, taking it when Tottenham had the second bite of the cherry. So I think this is a really fascinating situation that whether or not there are talks next month, I don't know that it's going to get Tottenham to where they want to be. I'm not saying he won't sign a new contract. I just don't think it's going to be a decision that he makes anytime soon. And that will, of course, put the spotlight on that situation more and more as the months go on. Of course, it plays into everyone's hands. If he has a really successful season and results pick up, and then he decides to stay and Tottenham are challenging, that's the dream scenario. But life doesn't always work out like that. So, yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, let's rattle off a couple quick fire sort of news items for you as well then, David. Wilfred Zaha's contract also up in the summer, I believe, goal midweek. What are Palace fans to expect from that one?
Well, Crystal Palace would dearly love to sign Wilfried Zaha to a new contract, I'm sure. But with free agency looming and he's never had that big move that many have anticipated. Of course, he went to Manchester United earlier in his career, but it didn't work out. And since then, we've seen Arsenal heavily consider him before they went for Nicola Pepe in the summer of 2019. We've seen Tottenham heavily linked with him at various points. We've seen Chelsea consider him, I think, last summer among many players that they looked at. But that move hasn't happened. Crystal Palace have always valued him so highly because they know without him, there's a good chance that they could be in a relegation scrap. And if they were to get relegated, then what's that transfer fee worth in terms of the revenues you lose and the prestige you lose when you go down? And so they've always set a very high asking price in their mind. I don't think that's a publicly or even necessarily privately communicated asking price. And then there'll be a number of clubs who look at this and say, can we get him as a free agent in the summer of 2023? There don't appear to be many better ones out there for the sort of work he does and what he produces for Palace. So I don't know. There'll be some conversations, no doubt, and Palace will push to try and bring him to the negotiating table. I don't know if there are talks at this moment in time. If there are, I don't know what resolution they'll lead to. Many in the game feel that he will hold out and go as a Bosman free agent and play in the Champions League, for example, a level that many people think he belongs at. But another tense situation. For now, he and Palace will just be delighted with his form. But it's that sort of elephant in the room that needs to be addressed in the months ahead. And maybe the World Cup's an opportunity, or maybe it is another situation that sort of bubbles away as the season progresses and we don't get clarity until closer towards the summer.
David, absolutely loved that. Thank you so much for your time today. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.